That's it. I think it's finally happened. At this point, we could hear about a dark, gritty reboot of the Thundercats, and I'd just be sitting there going, figures. Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob, and on this episode, as promised, we're going to be talking about nothing but Power Rangers. So, of course, the big 2017 reboot of the long-running 1990s, and actually it's still going. I know some of you might find that a surprise. Power Rangers new episodes are still being made. I forget what the current version is being called. I think they're on the 20-something iteration of this Mighty Morphin saga. For this episode, we're going to be talking about of course, in-depth review of the new Power Rangers film, as well as a journey back in time to the premiere of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers series in the episode entitled Day of the Dumpster. It's actually streaming. The entire Mighty Morphin Power Rangers series is streaming on Netflix, so I actually, in preparation for the new movie, I thought it would be fun to go back and rewatch that first episode. Actually, Freddie had mentioned to me beforehand that he had done the same, and I had been thinking about it, but I guess that was finally the push that I needed to actually go back and rewatch it, and it was an interesting experience. So let's jump right into my discussion of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Season 1, Episode 1, Day of the Dumpster.
After 10,000 years, I'm free! It's time to conquer Earth!
Alpha, Readers Escape. Recruit a team of teenagers with attitudes.
On August 28th, 1993, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers debuted on, I believe it was a Saturday morning on Fox Kids, and it was one of the big shows to really formulate that as a block of programming, and really kind of blow up, I guess, the Saturday morning television lifestyle of kids back in the 90s. Believe it or not, younger people listening, that was something that we did back in the early 90s, is we woke up on Saturday morning early to watch our favorite shows, because there was no Netflix, there was no DVR. You could set a recorder for something on your VCR, if you even know what that is, but but Saturday morning was a thing. And for me personally, I didn't really watch Power Rangers in the mornings on Saturdays. I watched it, believe it was 3:30, 4 o'clock or something, right after school. I'd come home and I'd rush to the TV, be like, oh my god, Power Rangers is about to start. So it was kind of an interesting experience to go back and revisit this episode for the first time. And I don't know if I've seen it since I was really in hardcore Power Rangers mode back in the early to mid 90s. But I may have watched this one episode once since then, but I don't really recall in general. So let's just go into this. So, watching this movie, you get right from and you heard it in the audio clip I just played from the opening theme, where Zordon's like, Alpha, recruit these teenagers with attitude. And it's so weird to hear him say that, because if you watch the show, these teenagers don't really have attitude at all. I mean, I'll get into that a little bit more, but they're like really good kids, and to the fact that anybody thought these were teenagers with attitude was just such a marketing thing to appeal to the young kids watching. Be like, oh, I want to have attitude like these kids, even though they were all really solid role models. And of course, everything about this show is ridiculously 90s, from the hairstyle, the way they act, the way they talk. Kimberly is like straight up a Valley girl, right out of, Clueless style Valley girl. And there's a lot of stereotypes with all of the characters. Jason is the white guy, part Asian, I believe. I don't remember if he's depicted as such on the show, but he kind of gives off that vibe, at least. And of course, he's teaching martial arts lessons because Power Rangers know Kung Fu. Zach is the black guy, so of course he's a dancer. Trini is Asian, so she's doing like yoga poses in the opening. And Kimberly is a teenage girl, so she's like, as if, and that kind of thing. And of course, Billy's the nerd. So they really do fit all those niches really really closely. They don't. There's no imagination really into the character types. They're pretty much cookie cutter. This is your nerd. This is your jock. This is your cool guy. This is your your popular girl, that kind of thing. And I apologize for if I sound a little stuffy. I've been fighting a cold this week, so if I noticed that I'm starting to sound like that a little bit. I should probably explain that. So, of course, one of the things about the Power Rangers show that's most memorable, most talked about, is the fact that it's a lot of recycled footage. I didn't know this at the time watching this as a kid, but all the suited footage, that is the Rangers in their outfits doing battle and that kind of, basically whenever you don't see the American actors, that is footage from a Japanese show from the 70s called Super Sentai, and that series has sort of been the basis for the Power Rangers TV series kind of ever since. And they've kind of just rejiggered that footage into their own version for American audiences, and kind of making changes along the way. So the theme song still rocks. That was fun for me to hear, and we'll talk about the movie later where they play the theme song briefly in the new movie, not the 95 movie. So this episode starts out, astronauts find a dumpster. Of course, they are idiots and they open it up, and that's where Rita comes out. After 10,000 years, I'm free. All the dialogue in here is ridiculous. The bumbling bad guys interactions where Rita's basically abusing her minions, Finster and Goldar and that kind of thing. Those are all really cheesy, but I wonder, part of me wonders how much of that is lost in the translation. Because this is based on pre-existing footage, I wonder if that dialogue was dumbed down even more for American audiences, if they were saying something completely different, because we've seen, in the original show, the Green Ranger and the White Ranger are not the same person, but for the American version, that Tommy Oliver character, of course this is not in this episode, was such a breakout hit that they basically turned him into that character, turned Green Ranger into White Ranger, which is not the case in the original show. So I wonder how much of that is in the bad guy scenes, and some of that is how much of the humor and the interactions, the dynamic is different based on the culture change, and if it maybe works a little better if you actually see that original footage in the context for which it was intended. But the lip syncing, oh my god, the lip syncing was ridiculous, and I sort of recognized that it was seemed a little weird whenever Rita would talk, but I didn't notice just how bad it is, where she says something and her mouth does not match at all what she's trying to say. The sound effects during the fighting, of course, was and stuff like that. It's really funny to see now the production values and how shoddy they are for this show, watching it as an adult versus as a kid. You didn't care about any of that shit. It was just a really fun superhero mythology that they had, where there were aliens and they were, they had these giant robot cars that looked like dinosaurs, and there was a lot of an interesting mythos set up for the Power Rangers, that regardless of the ridiculous comedy, regardless of all the other stuff, there's still something there. So you could see why that franchise has stuck around as long as it has, to the point that now it's being reborn into a $100 million blockbuster. So of course they're all the Rangers here are martial arts experts and gymnastics experts, etc. And I think it's funny how they establish right out the gate that Billy is still learning how to fight. He doesn't really know, and of course this fits with the whole nerd stereotype that he's fulfilling here. He doesn't really know how to fight. You see in some of the early fights, pretty much most of the combat in this episode, he's just trying to avoid being fighting, especially when he's not in the suit, because again, this is the American footage. And then you have Bulk and Skull as the sort of bumbling bully characters here. Like I said, Zach is a dancer. It feels like the show that, and I've heard this comparison before, but it feels like the Ranger side of the show, when they're not in their suits, that feels more like Saved by the Bell. Like, it really feels like an early 90s kids show. Whereas the Rita stuff feels like a totally different show because she is from a totally different show. She's from the Super Sentai footage. So it makes it feel very jarring watching it now with the American footage and the Japanese footage. So as I was saying, the Rangers are really already, before they even get the power coins, they're good role models throughout. They're excuse me. They're healthy, they're active, they're like really good, kind-hearted. They stand up for each other. They're really involved in their community. Excuse me. I mean, they're drinking spinach juice, for God's sake. So it's really interesting to see that they are, at this point, considered to have attitude. One thing that I did really like is the way that Zordon responds to requests that Alpha send over some overbearing and over-emotional humans. I thought that was such a perfect way to describe teenagers, especially American teenagers in the early 90s, who are basically on a kids' TV show and are all stereotypes in their own way. So they're teleported to the command center. Kimberly, of course, being the Valley Girl type that she is, jokes about, oh, this is not exactly the mall, and which made me roll my eyes to the back of my head. It's just like, it's so funny to see the show. I keep saying this, but it's so funny to see this show now through 20-something years of life later, and then kind of realizing how bad some of the writing is. Even though it's still fun, and I'm not gonna lie, there's still moments that I was genuinely invested in it. So Zordon explains that the powers the Zords are drawn from the different dinosaurs that were, prevalent in the millions of years ago when the first Rangers were born. Jason, of course, is the one who's most interested in this, wanting to be a hero, wanting to lead. And then Alpha does his aye. They decide, I don't know how I feel about this. They walk out. Jason, of course, lingers a moment later, which is something that's echoed in the new movie, which I thought was a nice touch. And I actually had pointed out to me from a YouTube video that I watched. And I was, that had totally slipped by me. I didn't even realize about that. So Finster gets that Monster-matic to make the Putty Patrol, which to me were always kind of lame regular villains. I mean, it's what they had to fight, and they would just kind of disappear or break apart. I forget what they would do, but they were always really weird. And the whole Rita herself is much sillier than I remember, which really puts into context Elizabeth Banks' performance in the new movie. And it's interesting how the Rangers even here, at least with the stereotypes going on, when they are in the American footage, they do have very much their own style. Zach has sort of a dance fighting thing going on. So when they're not suited up, they have very specific fighting styles. But then when they get to the Japanese footage, because it's not the same actors, it is very homogenized. Like the way they fight, the way they move is all super over dramatic and total shift in tone. And there's nothing really distinguishing of any of them except the colors on their outfits, basically. So the effects, of course, here are terrible. But it's the early 90s. It's a kids show. It's like, well, what do you expect them to do? They're not going to invest heavy money in this. They didn't really have... Some of you may remember that they did not have Game of Thrones money for any kind of TV show, let alone a children's show. Basically reappropriating old footage on the cheap to make a profit on, which is initially how this was born. Of course, Power Rangers have become something much bigger than that since. They suck at fighting putties at this point, but when they grab those morphers and they have that first time where they go, it's morphin' time, pterodactyl, triceratops, all that stuff. That was Tyrannosaurus. That still was thrilling for me. I mean, granted, I have 20-something years of experience with this franchise. Well, not consistently, because I didn't really watch the subsequent versions. I think soon after they went from Mighty Morphin Power Rangers to Power Rangers Zeo is where I started to lose interest, because it didn't really seem like the same show anymore, because it wasn't. It was evolving into something else. And at that point I was like 13, 14 and starting to be like, yeah, okay, this is not for me anymore. But that moment here, watching it now as a 33-year-old man, when they were Morphin Time, was still really fun. Even though, yes, they kind of buy into the Ranger thing, and Zordon and all this aliens that they're fighting and everything, they kind of buy into that really quickly. And there's really no introduction to Goldar, which is interesting. I had always forgotten that. I actually had sort of forgot that Goldar was the first villain that they fought. And Goldar actually becomes basically Rita's, like, first henchman, basically. Her right-hand henchman for a lot of these the first season or two of the show. And he didn't really get an introduction. He just sort of shows up and gets big, and they fight. And watching it now, it's when they do actually suit up, it should have been obvious that they're all different actors because they all have very different body types. I mean, I don't even know in the original version of Super Sentai if which Rangers were men, which were women, because you can't really tell in the way the suits hang on them. So it's interesting now watching the show, knowing that, to try and piece together, well, okay, they fit this together this way, and this is how that footage is being used in a different way for American audiences. So basically the reason I wanted to talk about Day of the Dumpster is this is essentially the same plot as the new movie. There is the Rita Repulsa is accidentally freed from basically being, I don't know, frozen, locked away, whatever she is, doesn't matter. She's basically reawakened after thousands of years, decides to take on Earth. The Rangers, meanwhile, but get their power, and they fight Goldar, and they call it with the Zords and everything. So basically, the Day of the Dumpster, if you make that with $100 million budget, this is what we get, and that's the film that they just released. So it's interesting to see that. The first episode here actually has very little action. So you have all the stock footage that's used every single episode. The morphing is, of course, reused. A lot of the Zords, calling the Zords, it's just the same footage that you're just showing over and over and over. Not to mention, like I said, all the recycled stuff from Super Sentai. So it makes you wonder how much of these, in each episode of subsequent Power Rangers episode, of that 22 minutes of footage, like how much of that footage was actual, like, new footage that they made and not repeated footage or footage from before being used with a different voiceover track. Probably, I would venture to say less than 10 minutes. You have the couple scenes in the beginning with them not suited. They have one fight before they morph, and then everything else is just kind of voiceover. So it's weird watching it now that they randomly know how to use the Zords, which again is something that's sort of inherent in the story of the Power Rangers. In the new movie, they have the same kind of thing. And I always thought it was cool as a kid how all the Zords combine into one control room where they all sit together and kind of strategize what they're going to do with the fight. But watching the giant fight now is just sad. It's so obviously too. I mean, I've never been huge. I'm not really big into the old Godzilla movies or the new Godzilla movies even, or any of that kind of thing. I didn't really. You guys heard me talk about Kong Skull Island a while ago on this podcast a week or two ago, and I didn't really care for that. So I'm not really huge on these giant monster fights, especially the ones in suits. But it's still fun from like a cheesy perspective to see the Megazord. So clearly a guy in a suit fighting a monster. So clearly a guy in a suit, and with these like cardboard buildings. And on that front, it does still work. But I can only imagine how silly it was for them to record these voiceovers. Like, we need to hit him there. Yeah. I bet it was a real bonding thing for Austin St. John and David Yost and Amy Jo Johnson and all of them to record the show. It's interesting how they really, I mean, you know, this is what they've become known for. They are Power Rangers, just like Mark Hamill. No matter how many times he voices the Joker, whatever else he does with his time and his career, he's always gonna be Luke Skywalker. So it's interesting to see how these characters, these actors have become so intertwined in the minds of fans worldwide. I also noticed that there's a different voice for Goldar here in this first episode. It's a more serious voice than what we get later on, where he's like, Rita! He's more... I didn't do his voice very well, but you get the idea. Zordon, of course, lays out at the end of the episode the 3 basic rules to be a Power Ranger. 1, never use your power for personal gain. 2, never escalate a battle unless you're forced to. And 3, always keep your identity a secret. Which... I'm so glad I watched Day of the Dumpster before I saw the new movie, because Bryan Cranston as Zordon quotes those exact 3 rules, almost, I think, verbatim. So that was really that was really cool that they referenced the TV show in that way. And of course, Kimberly has to follow the whole, oh, are you guys in? Are you going to be superheroes? And Kimberly like, not, which makes me, oh, the 90s. What are you going to do? Humor, what a concept, Alpha says when that happens. And of course, they have a freeze frame because this is the 90s. But, you know, regardless of all the criticisms that I'm throwing at the effects and the writing and all that, like I said, there really is that mythology there, that base mythology that really resonates with kids then, with kids now, clearly, because it's still rolling. And, you know, that, I guess, still hits people in the nostalgia right there, where everything, I mean, look, this month alone, Beauty and the Beast from the 90s, well, this version from the 90s, Ghost in the Shell was an animated film. I mean, it's been manga and other things since then, but the original film version of that was in the 90s. And Power Rangers in the 90s. It's just this sort of very 90s heavy nostalgia because all the people now that are having kids, getting married, having kids, growing up, millennials, I guess, they all grew up in the 90s watching all this stuff and pretending that they were Power Rangers, just like I did. So it's interesting to see that, to see this then and how it's kind of taken on a life of its own. Plus, this show basically took something that was huge in Japan, took the Super Sentai, yeah, that specifically, but also took the giant monster, the kaiju genre, to American kids. And as someone whose parents never really exposed me to the Godzilla movies or the King Kong movies or that part of the culture, that was brand new to me. So I was like, oh shit. They have these Zord, they have these robots, and then they morph, and I wasn't really big into Transformers. I guess I should mention that too. So it's interesting now that I was into Power Rangers, but I wasn't into Transformers. I guess maybe I was a little too young when that was in its heyday. I don't know. But it took that concept and brought it into the States for ignorant kids like me would eat it up and want to buy all the toys. And of course, the Zords and everything changed every year or so that you'd have to buy the new toys. So it was really smart of them of Saban to do that. And, you know, you have a whole population of kids over here to whom that whole kaiju world still seemed novel. So that was a really smart business move. And going back and revisiting this episode was really fun. I will probably not watch the remaining 3 seasons on Netflix. However, based on the post-credit scene in the new movie, there is a specific arc that I very much want to revisit in preparation for the likely sequel that we're going to be getting. So that's a perfect segue. Let's go right into my review / discussion of Power Rangers 2017.
You were born for this.
I will destroy everything.
She is pure evil.
How do you expect us to stop her?
It's morphin' time.
All right, so Power Rangers 2017. So first of all, let me let you know the format that we've been using for reviews the past few episodes. We're going to go into the hype, the story, the cast, the production, and then finally the verdict. So starting out with Power Rangers 2017, let's move into the hype. So in case you couldn't tell by now, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is one of the cornerstones of my childhood. I always say that it can be broken down really into 3 distinct eras: Masters of the Universe, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Of course, with 90s nostalgia all the rage right now, it's really just a matter of time before a fresh take on Power Rangers hit theaters. Especially after that Power/Rangers fan film that was released online just a couple years ago. So when news broke that Dean Israelite of Project Almanac, which I still haven't seen because I heard a lot of mixed to negative things about it, when I heard that he was brought on to direct and we started seeing images of Elizabeth Banks, an actress who I've always been a big fan of, and the Rangers Iron Man-esque suits, I'm not gonna lie, it was an adjustment. I was a little bit cautious and hesitant about seeing the characters that I was such fans of as a kid reimagined for a new generation and sort of revisiting the origin story for the first time since the 90s. But luckily, you know, unlike the 1995 film, which was the big screen version of the TV show with the same cast, Jason David Frank as a movie star, that was actually the centerpiece of my 12th birthday party, and that which came out on my birthday, and it was a whole thing. My whole 12th birthday was like I was obsessed with Power Rangers and making that like the whole crux of my birthday that year. Unlike that film, which was based on the TV show, this is basically restarting the franchise, as I said, that has been ongoing since Day of the Dumpster back in 1993. For the first time, even though the TV show and TV series continues in various forms, this is the first time we're going back and seeing Jason, Kimberly, Zach, Trini, and Billy, and them discovering the power coins. So with superhero films and nostalgia, both at seemingly peak popularity in Hollywood, question was, could Saban revamp the super cheesy TV series into the next blockbuster superhero franchise? Yeah, sort of. That brings us directly into the story. So, of course, we're going to be going into full spoilers when necessary here. So, the film opens with a prologue of Rita and Zordon, and the Yellow Ranger Zordon's the Red Ranger, and Rita's the Green Ranger, and the Yellow Ranger's dying near Zordon, which I thought was immediately, I know that there's another reference in here because Becky G has a 1973 shirt, and I know that's a reference to the actress who originally played Trini, who has since passed away. So I thought opening the film with the Yellow Ranger dying when she has, in fact, passed away in real life, is the only one of the original cast to do so since the original show aired, Day of the Dumpster, as I was talking about. I thought that was probably another little subtle homage to that and in tribute. So I thought that was an interesting way to open the film. And I thought the prologue was a fun reimagining that really makes the rivalry between Rita and Zordon more personal, kind of deepens the mythology in that way, and makes it gives it more of a sense of history rather than, oh, I'm Zordon and I'm here to put together the Rangers, and oh, Rita just so happens to be doing her thing trying to conquer Earth. So from there we move into the present day. This time they really are teens with attitude. It kicks off with Jason as a disgraced jock thanks to a botched prank that he was involved in. Kimberly is a mean girl who went too far, and that involves this really sort of off-putting sexting subplot that I felt raises a lot of weird questions. And they really could have had another angle that would have been a little more appropriate for this property. But anyway, that's her deal. Zach is channeling his grief for his ailing mother into a sort of death wish, hanging around this quarry. And Trini is processing her family's lack of acceptance with her sexuality. Of course, if you're a Power Rangers fan of this, you probably heard the news story about the film being the first to feature an LGBT superhero in a main role. So that was an interesting twist on that character. And Billy is actually on the autism spectrum. He's an outcast at school and still dealing with the loss of his dad. So basically, they're all troubled in some way, and this cast really represents the diversity that has been a part of Power Rangers from the beginning, without having the sort of racist stereotype of like, oh, the black guy wears the black suit, the Asian lady wears the yellow suit, and things like that are a little like, it's questionable now. It takes brings a group of characters with different genders, with different sexuality, with different issues and ethnicities, and remixes them into a modern version of it. And I thought that was very successful. They're all really troubled in some way, and they find strength in each other and intergalactic power coins. That being said, the superhero side of things actually isn't even the best part of the film. It's the way in which the Rangers, who, as I mentioned earlier, were once stereotypes on the original show, at least with that first episode, they really come alive as characters with real problems, inner conflict, home lives, that kind of thing. Whereas before, they were just sort of islands in their juice bar or at school or fighting monsters, pretty much. In this version, there's a real connection between them by the time they morph, and the film uses their superpowers, which now smartly extend beyond the suits, since the same actors are used throughout this time, and kind of adds a dash of Chronicle, of course. People mentioned with the trailers, a dash of Spider-Man with the fact that they wake up and they're super powerful, having survived a car crash that would have certainly killed them had they not had the power coins on them. And it uses the superpowers as a kind of metaphor for, as cheesy as it sounds, the power of friendship. That by the end, they come to sort of Guardians of the Galaxy, in a little bit like that. They come together, and then they're able to channel their power, and in this case, morph. That being said, there's still a lot of little off-color jokes that I felt were, a few off-color jokes that I thought were really kind of out of place and sort of sticking out like a sore thumb. I would say the opening bull masturbation joke. Yeah, really. That one I thought was really weird and not funny in the moment, but then afterwards you're like, ew, what? But there's a lot of fun moments and Easter eggs. You had Jason David Frank and Amy Jo Johnson cameoing. There was a Transformers reference. There's a lot of good stuff here. Fun moments, character moments, powerful moments with the characters, and a lot of channeling the spirit of the original show, but in a more modern, more grounded context. And it really lays the foundation for stronger adventures to come now that we have already seen them get the power and become the team that they are meant to be. That brings us, of course, to the cast. So a lot of what works about this film, as I was saying with the way they set up the characters, is the cast. R.J. Seiler, Dacre Montgomery, Naomi Scott, Ludi Lin, Becky G. They're all outstanding in these roles, with really Seiler, Montgomery, and Scott probably taking the biggest focus. They're the ones we follow from the very beginning of the film. They're the ones we sort of see in the school environment first before we see them in the mine, I guess it is, where they end up finding the power coins. And they're those 5 actors and their characters are really the heart of the film, and the biggest reason why I feel really vindicated in defending it. With lesser actors, less delicate handling of the characters, this could have been another Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2014. And that's a film that I enjoy as sort of a guilty pleasure, but not one that I would ever say is particularly good. Like, fans of Ninja Turtles, if they were to see those new movies and be like, this is bullshit, fuck those Michael Bay produced movies, I would have to be like, well, yeah, okay, I understand. But I still get enjoyment out of them, and I was worried that Power Rangers was going to be that same thing, but thanks to this cast, I feel more justified in saying that this is a solid film that actually does try and tell a story. So, Bryan Cranston, of course, here, who had voiced a pair of villains on Mighty Morphin back in the day, lends the same gravitas here that he brings to all his projects as Zordon, who even in this version has his own motivation and therefore added depth, whereas before he was just a floating head on a wall. Here there's a really cool effect in which he can move across the wall, but we also know a little more about his backstory, what he wants to accomplish here, and he even makes a sacrifice throughout the film when he brings Billy back and sacrifices his one chance to return to life. It really, everything that Cranston brings here really helps make this admittedly silly storyline work really much better than it would have with a lesser actor with a less charismatic presence. Bill Hader is fine as Alpha 5. He's definitely way less annoying than he was on the show. He's still got the ay, but now it's not ay. Now he's just like ay. More as a frustrated uncle, be like, ay, what are you doing? But he plays his supporting part well here. Alpha was never obviously a particularly interesting character in the original show. He was basically the Jar Jar Binks of the original Power Rangers. Yeah, I said it. And here he's fine. He does his job, and if we see more of him in the sequel, that's fine. If we don't, he's not the one that we're there to see anyway. So Elizabeth Banks is, of course, wonderfully over the top. In fact, to me, at times she feels like she's actually so far over the top that it felt jarring to the more grounded approach that we're getting with the Rangers story. In that way, I guess it does perfectly mirror the show, though, because as I said, Rita did feel like she was on another show completely, because she was with the footage, but also here that sort of carries over in that Elizabeth Banks is channeling a totally different tone than the rest of the film, and if that was an intentional stylistic choice, then it really worked. Although personally it did sort of take me out a little bit and bring down my enjoyment of what was actually happening with the Rangers when Elizabeth Banks is walking into a jewelry store and like swallowing gold so that she can summon Goldar. That was all a little goofy, and I could have done without the like Freddy Krueger like scary elements of her character. It felt a little off for me. Moving into the production. Again, I apologize for all the coughing. Like I said, I've been fighting a cold, and it's just... Yeah, by next episode, hopefully I should be better. Moving into the production. The effects were all really solid and really effective throughout here. Effective, as you would think. Sure, there's some of the same problems that plague the Transformers. There's a kind of sameness that goes on with the Zords that it's almost a little hard to tell what they're doing at times. But for the most part, I think they did have the camera far back enough. The camera. I'm putting camera in quotes because this is all digital, a lot of it. That you could see what was happening and sort of get a feel for the layout of things rather than Transformers where they go super close and super quick cutting and you're just like, I don't even understand what's going on. Goldar and the putties here are essentially faceless blobs. But, that's more of a design issue than a visual effects one. It's not a particular choice. It's not a choice that I particularly care for. But it's one that we're seeing more and more in blockbusters. Suicide Squad did that with their villains that the Enchantress was summoning there. And, I didn't really care for the way that they were depicted. And we really only see them fight the putties. Well, holograms of putties, I think, once or twice. And then in the suits, like one brief scene before they call the Zords. Hopefully we won't get that. They'll either do a redesign on the putties in sequels, or we'll just be able to skip the Putty Patrol altogether, because that wasn't really... They're not really the most challenging foes for the Power Rangers anyway. So I'd rather they go up against something a little bit more formidable. The score was appropriately moody in places, but for me, musically, it was that moment when the 1995 version of the theme song come blaring out when they're running on their Zords, and the same two-dimensional shot of the Zords running. That was a really powerful moment for me. It reminded me a little bit of last year when the Ghostbusters theme slowed down with Kate McKinnon's hero moment with the bam, bam. So I had a little bit of that here. It's just something really about seeing / hearing a bit of my childhood come to life that is really indescribable, and it's a kind of magical movie moment that it's fun to experience in something like this. One thing that I definitely thought was distracting was, oh my god, let's talk about the Krispy Kreme briefly. I understand the need for product placement, but this was just so overbearing, and they said the name so many times in the third act where Elizabeth Banks is like, oh, we're going to the Krispy Kreme, and they stop for her to eat a donut, and Jason or one of the other Rangers like, we gotta go, she's almost at the Krispy Kreme, and I was just like, Jesus Christ, can you tone it down a little bit? I just wish that they didn't lean into it so heavily. I just hope Krispy Kreme put a lot of money into this production to warrant such repeated usage to the point. I mean, I was getting IHOP and Man of Steel flashbacks with this one, and let's hope that now that this film is doing well and will presumably do well enough to warrant a sequel, that they won't have to do that as much next time, and then that we don't have to have Rita going back to the Krispy Kreme again, because man, it was a little much. And I guess you could sort of lean into it, be like, all right, I guess we're gonna be cheesy with it. Let's go to the Krispy Kreme, but it was a little distracting for me. So let's go into the verdict. So all in all, I thought this was a really fun movie. I was, as I said with Ninja Turtles, I was worried this was gonna be that kind of movie where I would come out and be like, yeah, it's not very good, but it's Power Rangers, and I didn't feel that at all. Actually, I felt that somewhat, but I didn't feel that as much as I thought I would. Thanks to the cast, the way they approached this, the way that they took their time with the origin of these superheroes, just like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man in 2002, just like Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins in 2005, and I'm not going to say that this movie is Power Rangers up to the level of those films. Not at all. But I think that was a smart narrative choice to pace their origin over the course of the film. Even though it does make certain parts of the middle act feel a little bit slow, I think ultimately when they do morph, when they do get the Zords, when they do suit up, I think it makes it more worth it. And if they do what they're planning, which apparently is a 6-movie plan that Saban has in mind here, we'll have plenty of time to see them in their suits, to see them in the Zords, to see them fighting all kinds of monsters, whatever Rita and Lord Zed, hopefully, please, fingers crossed for Lord Zed. I thought he was super awesome as a kid, so I would love to see him in here. And of course, everybody knows we got that Tommy Oliver Ferris Bueller style shout out here in the post-credit scene where he does not show up for detention. And I thought the fact that they made the post-credit scene a Ferris Bueller's Day Out sort of homage really was in keeping with the John Hughes style of this film. It did sort of feel like if John Hughes was going to do a superhero movie, this is pretty close to what that would be, because we have the Breakfast Club sort of opening act, and then the Bueller tag at the end, and I thought that was a really interesting way to approach Power Rangers, something that's this cheesy Saved by the Bell meets giant monsters TV show from the 90s, and I thought they found a way to make it modern but still true to the original enough that it's recognizable, but not so far that it becomes ridiculous again. They kind of towed that line between being silly and being serious, and maybe this movie doesn't hit that middle ground as well as it should. It sort of shifts back and forth rather than landing squarely in the middle. But this is also the first time they've done this, and considering how bad this film could have been, if you want to see a crappy Power Rangers movie, watch the 95 one, which, even though I guess, like I said, that was my whole 12th birthday was about that film. I've watched it recently. I made Kai watch it. It's not particularly good. It's really cheesy and really ridiculous and really poorly made in a lot of ways. I enjoy it from a guilty pleasure standpoint, like I said, but it's not a good film. And I feel like this is Power Rangers that I would maybe show my daughter. This is the Power Rangers that I feel like I can legitimately recommend to someone that didn't really care for the original show or that stuff, or went back and watched it and was like, what a piece of crap. This one might bring it into adulthood for them in a way. I do think the movie is probably a little bit too dark for like small kids, but for people our age who grew up with this stuff, I think it's definitely a go. And if they're planning 5 more of these, I say bring it on, and go Power Rangers. So that'll be all for my discussion of Power Rangers, the TV show, and the new movie. I hope you enjoyed that. For next week, I'm trying to keep to the weekly posting schedule here. Next week, I'm planning something sort of a little different, but I could mention it now. But let's see, plans change, so I won't jinx it. I have had a lot of schedule changes in my life as of recently, so I'll just let you guys sit on that one for next week. Until then, you can follow me on Twitter @Crooked Table. Find Crooked Table on Facebook. Find me on Instagram. Find us on Tumblr. Let me know what you think of this episode. Let me know what you think, or what you thought of Power Rangers, rather, the new movie. Does it live up to the show? Is it a major disappointment? And what other shows from your childhood would you like to see adapted to the big screen next? Shoot me a tweet over @Crooked Table. Let me know what you think of that. Until next time, roll credits.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
CROOKED.